In this video, I'm going to take you through a full water heater replacement from this ancient beast of a water heater, and it had a lot of problems, to this 40-gallon natural gas Bradford White replacement with everything up to code. In this video, I'm going to take you through everything, the whole process of replacing this ancient water heater with a new one. And there was a lot of things to address. When I first came to this water heater, it was kind of making my head spin because there were so many things that were done wrong or that were problematic. I mean, it was clear to me that this was going to just have to be gutted, everything. Just take everything back to the pipes at the walls and the floors and whatever, and totally start over. You can see here in this picture, the expansion tank is dangling by the pipe. It was full of water, so it had been compromised a long time ago. It's held by some cheesy strap. You can see how crooked and crazy all of this copper pipe is. It's been torqued out of square. I mean, just crazy. The water heater was sitting in a closet in the upper floor of a townhouse. It did have a pan. You could see the pan had water in it from leakage over and over. So that had to be replaced. It's a plastic pan, which is already a bad idea for a gas water heater. But take a look closely here. Even at the discharge pipe from the T&P valve, there's a threaded adapter on the bottom of that. That's against code. You can't have threads on a discharge pipe because if that gets closed up by someone who doesn't know any better, well, then you've got major pressure problems. So that clearly had to be eliminated. And then, of course, we're dealing with an old water heater, the cheesy piece of junk plastic drain valves that they put on these. When you come to one this old, you kind of cross your fingers, hope that it's not going to break off as soon as you touch it, hope that the water's going to come out of there because you know it's full of sediment. There were a lot of challenges just looking at this thing before I even started. Here's another view of the dangled, mangled mess of pipe above the water heater. Clearly, the water heater had been leaking from the connection point. There was a lot of hard water buildup across the top of the water heater. Another important thing to do anytime you're replacing a water heater is take some measurements. And this had worried me just walking up to the closet door because it looked narrow. I measured and yeah, it's 18 inches. 18 inches is enough for an old water heater like this, but water heaters since 2015 are larger. They have more insulation. We're talking 20-inch diameter. Right away I could see, just to get a new water heater in here, the door jam's going to have to come out to get that 20 inches. Inside of the space, when I take a measurement, I had almost 27 inches, which is plenty when it comes to putting a new tank in there, but getting it through the door was going to take some work. Whenever I'm dealing with these old water heaters, I like to take a minute just to see how old they are as a matter of interest. This one was from 1980. Yeah, that's as old as me. So it's been in there a while. So I'll hand it to them. Back in the day, they made water heaters that would last a long time. I don't care what manufacturer you're dealing with today, none of the water heaters are going to last as well as this old boy did. One nice thing about this installation, the whole townhouse was under renovation, so they were fixing a lot of walls and floors. Didn't have to be quite as careful about things, but I decided to get the new water heater in so that I could be working on that while the old one was draining down and kind of do both simultaneously. I had to remove the door casing, so took off the door, took off the trim around the door, used a Sawzall to buzz through the little finished nails and clear that out. The idea was we were going to try and keep this door and put it back in place so that, we didn't have to replace that. But I definitely needed a wider opening, so just had to work it out for a bit. Whenever I replace a water heater, I'm really interested in starting draining the existing tank as soon as possible because sometimes that takes the longest. Some plumbers will use air pressure or a pump to suck the water out of the tank. This one, I felt like I could probably get away with gravity draining. I ran a hose downstairs to a floor drain. The old plastic drain valve always scares me, and the fact that there's sediment in the tank, as I mentioned before, can be an issue. But I figured, let's go for it. I hooked up the hose and started draining. In order to get a water heater to drain down efficiently, you have to be able to allow air into there. Otherwise, it's going to create a vacuum. It won't flow very well. So we'll open the drain and then open the T&P valve. That's going to allow some air in, creates kind of a flow. In this case, I had to loosen up the drain valve to get it started, allow some of that sediment to flow through, but then I got a good flow coming to the drain. It could take half an hour or more to drain down, so in the meantime, I'm going to spend my time demoing all of the rest of this, removing the old expansion tank. As I do this, I have to be careful because it's full of water, and you want to make sure to catch that thing. It's going to be heavy. I worked on disassembling all the connections for the water lines, and this time I was literally going to cut everything out, all the way back to the wall, and start over. As I was disassembling the water pipe, I found one of the reasons there was a lot of hard water sediment on the top of the water heater had to do with this little line. It was a 1/4-inch line that runs up to a swamp cooler on the roof, but they'd replaced a section of this with plastic. The plastic had been leaning or pushing against the flue, and it had melted through the plastic, caused a leak, and that's a lot of the water deposits that we were seeing from the top. Clearly, that had to be addressed. While I'm taking this apart, I'm kind of strategizing already. Where can I put the new valves? How can I angle these pipes so it's not such a mess? And with that line going up to the swamp cooler on the roof, I knew I was going to need another valve for that connection. I'll tell you what, these low-profile copper tubing cutters that you can get are fantastic for this kind of work. They can speed it up. Just get in there, get in the tight spaces, spin it around the pipe, cut it off right where you want it. You can see I'm cutting right back to the wall. I decided that's where I was going to start, put the valves on there, and then bring the new pipes to the water heater from that point. I use the same cutter to remove the T&P discharge pipe. That helps me a little bit with taking that apart. Now, when I remove all of these pipes, I save them and recycle them. I mean, as a plumber, I'm into enough copper and brass that it's worth collecting that, turn it in, and, save the world, do some recycling, but they usually give a little cash for that too. It's not bad. But for that reason, I even strip off T&P valves, whatever's salvageable. I kind of take that apart while I'm removing the water heater, while it's draining down. Disconnecting the flue, you got to make sure to get all the way around, get all the screws out. Typically, there's 3 screws per connection. There should be. Obviously, before disconnecting the gas line, that would have to have been shut off. There's a little valve behind there that I decided I was going to replace, and that's going to require, a more extensive shutdown. But all of these connections have to be removed, obviously, before we can get the tank out of there. With the water heater draining down and all of the connections removed, now it's time for me to move forward with the install of the new one. So I'm going to get the box out, cut it open. Sometimes I'll do this out in the parking lot or by my vehicle before I bring it in. I'll always take note of the model and serial number of the water heater that I'm installing. Particularly for my customers, I include that on the invoice. But it's on the plate of the water heater, the sticker. It's right on there. But I like to make sure that it's documented as well. That's come in real handy when I have customers call with warranty issues, and I've already got all my numbers on my records. Another important part of preparation is the expansion tank. I like to make sure that it's charged up to near the system pressure, and I knew I was going to have this system pressure at about 65 because I would put in the pressure reducing valve and set that. But I'll just use a little compressor, hook it up to the expansion tank, set my pressure that I want, and let it go. In this case, again, I was going to be at 65, so I set the pressure, hit go, let that pump up. Once the expansion tank is all pumped up, then I'll put some Teflon tape, pipe dope, and put the cap back on the back of the air valve. Another piece of preparation is the temperature pressure relief valve discharge pipe, so I'll get that ready with some tape and dope. There's different types of pipe dope out there. I like the Monster, that's this whiter stuff. The Megalock, it's kind of blue, that's good stuff. And then I'll put the tape on. I typically go dope and then tape. There's a lot of plumbers that would disagree with me on that. I like to do it this way because I like to get that right down into the threads. And then I'm pretty thorough with my tape. I'll go around 5 or 6 times with this thinner tape. I've done it hundreds of times both ways, whether I put the tape or dope on first. It seems like if I'm thorough, it does a pretty good job sealing up. By the time I've brought in the new water heater, got that ready, prepared the expansion tank and other connections, Usually about that time, I've got the tank drained down, so I can start to remove it. Trying to move a water heater while there's still water in it is a bad idea. At this point, I can kind of move this. It's a little bit of back work, not my favorite. But the thing is, I've tried before to move them with water in them. Water weighs over 8 pounds per gallon. So, if you got 10 gallons left, you're looking at an extra 80 pounds. It adds up fast. So making sure it's drained down all the way is important. And then I always like to strap the water heater to my dolly. Because if I'm going downstairs, which usually there's some stairs involved, or wherever I'm going, I don't want it falling off the dolly and tipping over. Now again, because this place was under remodel, they'd ripped out the carpet. That made it a little easier for me, but if I'm replacing a water heater with existing finished surfaces, carpets, well, then I'm going to lay down drop cloths, try and keep it super clean because you don't want to damage anything on the way out. Now it's time to address the pan. Look at this dirty thing. Obviously, it's had water. Oh, it's grimy. It's connected to a drain, so I had to cut that off first, kind of get out of the way. And then I was surprised to find a hole in the subfloor underneath. As I looked at it, you can see joists structurally. I think everything's still there. The subfloor hadn't rotted much. So I felt like as long as I put a new pan over the hole, it's spanning from joist to joist. I wasn't too worried about the fact that there was a hole in there. I pride myself in being a clean plumber, and I've had a lot of compliments for that. People are like, wow, you clean everything so nice. Part of that's because I don't want to be working on all this dust and garbage while I'm, putting in the new one. How long does it take, really, to sweep it out? Not that long. So I just like to make sure everything's clean, ready to go before I start the rebuild. And now that I'm ready to rebuild, I'm going to start with the gas line since it's accessible. I had to shut off the gas, of course, and I'm going to replace the valve. A lot of the old gas valves don't even have a handle. They just have that little flat spot where you can connect your crescent wrench and turn them that way. I don't think that's a great idea to have a valve. You have to get a tool to turn it off, especially a gas valve, that you might need to turn off quickly. So whenever I see those, I make it a point to replace those with something that actually has a handle. And it's going to be easier to turn off when it's needed. The previous gas connection was missing the sediment trap or dirt leg. That's not really hard to create. Just put a T with a short pipe and a cap on the bottom. So as I'm reassembling all of this, I'm going to make sure to bring it up to code, put in the sediment trap. It's best to have that leg facing down. So if I have the T in a vertical position, that way, any dust or sediment that's coming through is going to hit that and drop down. And then the gas connection is going to come off the top. I'm taking care of all this gas part now because once that water heater is in place, I'm not going to be able to wrench like this. So here's my gas line with a new valve, sediment trap, all updated, ready for connection. I also made adjustments to the flue before installing the water heater. A lot of this stuff's just easier to do before it's there. Now, this is a 3-inch pipe. Most jurisdictions are going to require a 4-inch pipe. But in this case, the local jurisdiction is okay with an existing 3-inch pipe. We could connect to that if it was already there. And so I'm just trimming this up. The water heater is going in. It's a little bit taller. I'm trimming the flue so that it'll fit nicely to the top of the new heater. Now, another important part that I'm going to install are the earthquake straps. Local jurisdiction requires those. And you might look at, well, it's a tiny closet. If the whole thing shakes, where's it going to go? But hey, it's a code requirement. I'm going to have this inspected. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. So I measure the tank, and then I put one strap on the top third of the tank, one strap on the bottom third of the tank, and that bottom strap needs to be 4 inches above the gas valve. Now, this is all according to our local codes. Just want to make sure you do seismic according to whatever jurisdiction you're dealing with. I'll use the nylon straps. They look like seat belts. There's different kits you can buy. Best to work with the kits. Get it installed so it's going to meet those seismic requirements. Now keep in mind, this is order of operations. If I put the tank in and then I'm like, oh, I got to put some straps on this, even though I strap them after the tank is in, well, obviously these have to be connected before the tank is in. So there's method to this, right? Making sure that things are done before I put the tank in place. Now you'll notice that I also have the pan in place, obviously, before the new tank goes in. This is a 24-inch pan. It's aluminum. It has a drain connection, PVC off the back. and it worked nicely. I had to kind of angle it in, but there was enough floor space for it to set down. It set nicely. The existing drain was a 3/4 inch PVC, which is code approved. That's the minimum size. But the drain connection here has a 1 inch, so I had to put a little bit of a reducer there. And then I just hooked up the 90 and glued it to the existing pipe. Before putting the water heater in place, I felt like it would be timely to make adjustments to the water lines. I wanted to add a shutoff valve to both the cold and the hot. The hot side's not required, but it sure is nice when it's time to service if there's 2 valves there. The problem here was spatially, I didn't want to bring those valves straight out, so I decided to turn those up. I used copper 90s, angled those up, put in those sweat ball valves with some sweat PEX adapters. All that was easier to do with the water heater out of the way. Let me point out in the order of operations that getting these valves in place, being able to shut those off, enables me to turn the water back onto the building. And that's going to be awesome for the people if I'm doing that while they're there. So I like to get valves in place, turn water back on, and then I can continue with the whole rest of the installation, but they can use the water elsewhere if needed. So here we go, moment of truth. I had to take out the door jamb. I've got a 20-inch diameter tank, and I had an 18-inch opening. I've pulled off that jamb. Hopefully I've got 20 inches. It's going to be tight. As I was trying to grip that water heater, I realized my gloves weren't really going to help me. They're a little slick. So barehanded, gives a little better grip. Just kind of lean it back. Again, this isn't my favorite kind of back work. If you got 2 people, maybe that's better. But in a tight space, it's like, how many people can you get in there? Fortunately, water heater made it through the opening, set nicely in the pan. It was lining up pretty good. Once the water heater was in place, I could start to strap those, reach around the sides, grab the straps, and work those through. Again, there's different types of earthquake straps or strap assemblies. These are pretty quick and convenient. Next, I installed the discharge pipe from the temperature pressure relief valve. That has been trimmed to fit. It's just going to come down towards the pan. It has to have an air gap above the pan, but it's going to come right down, so any water would be diverted into the pan. With the water heater in place, I was ready to do the water connections. Now, let me emphasize the fact that the flue has to have a certain distance from combustibles. So if I'm going to use plastic PEX tubing, I have to be at least 6 inches away from that 3-inch single wall vent. And that's why I'm using metal flex connectors, moving them back out of the way. And then I can PEX that together so that, the PEX, which is a combustible, is far enough away from the flue. Once I have those distances, then I can just proceed with PEX. This isn't the most ideal, I think, layout for the PEX, but it works. It meets the code. It gets that out of the way. It made for some connections. Made for some good connections. On the cold side, if you remember, I had to hook up a line that goes to the swamp cooler on the roof. So I put a PEX T in there with a shutoff valve, brought the line up, and then back down to the flex connector that goes to the water heater. From up above, I was able to tee off and come to the expansion tank. The expansion tank before was just dangling, connected to the pipe. In this installation, I used an expansion tank strap kit, secured that to the wall, secured the expansion tank. That way it was supported properly, and just ran the PEX over the top and connected to the tank. All of that's happening on the cold side where it ought to be. Once the water lines are all connected, I'll typically turn those on and allow the tank to start to fill while I'm completing the flue connection and the gas line connection. And that way the tank's about ready, full of water, when I'm ready to fire it up. As I mentioned before, this flue is 3-inch, and in this jurisdiction, existing 3-inch is approved for connection. A lot of times you might have to upsize that to a 4-inch. In this case, it went together pretty quick, because the center of pipe was about the same for both tanks. I could just land that on top. I'm working to get 3 screws secured in there as is required for every single wall vent connection. And once the flue is in place, I can finish the gas line. I'm going to put the adapter into the gas valve, but caution here, you do not want to over tighten this. It is so easy to destroy an expensive gas valve by cranking too hard. I just put some dope and tape on there, give it a little bit of wrench, but not hard. And then from there, I like to put some dope on those compression connections. This is flex. You can see here why it's important that I got the gas line corrected before the tank was in. I can reach through and turn on and off that gas valve, but it's way back in there. It's kind of tough to see or even get to. But you can see how impossible that would be to try and get wrenches in and tighten gas line together. So this all came together pretty well with the flex line. So there it is, all put together, hooked up, ready to go. This was a 40-gallon natural gas, Bradford White, low NOx, and I will give 2 thumbs down for low NOx water heaters. Yes, they may save a little bit of emissions on the environment, but they are problematic. They are terrible. And I don't care what brand you're dealing with. Low NOx is bad news for tank-type water heaters. So yeah, manufacturers, this is your challenge. Make a low NOx that doesn't have nightmare issues, and we'll love ya. In the end, we were able to get the door jammed back in, put the trim pieces back, hang the door. It all came together pretty well. Once this townhouse condo was repainted and recarpeted, the whole thing looked pretty awesome. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you. I tried to take you step by step and did it in sequence. There is, again, order of operations, and if you do it in the right order, it can save you time, it can save you money, and start to finish, this is how I do it. Good luck on your water heater replacement project. See you next time.